Do you know about the Skin Guanyin? A 1-month-old baby girl has the softest and smoothest skin. Peel off the skin on her back intact. Soak it in the baby's blood for a full 18 days. When the baby's skin turns white with a hint of red, use a special incense to give it a distinctive aroma. Stitch and patch the skins of 100 baby girls onto a crafted Guanyin statue. Then dot the eyes with baby blood. This, they say, will bless pregnant women who come to worship, ensuring they conceive a baby boy. I initially took it as a story until the day my husband brought me back to the village, bowing repeatedly before the child-bearing Guanyin displayed in the ancestral hall. In a moment of looking down and then looking up, I seemed to glimpse the child held by the Skin Guanyin in its arms, its eyes rolling. That night, I dreamt of a child with blurry flesh and blood all over its body, using sharp claws to open my belly. When I was sleeping soundly at night, I heard bursts of children's laughter. I couldn't bear the disturbance. I thought it was the neighbor's child upstairs, who didn't sleep in the middle of the night. I frowned and opened my eyes. The gray walls and old curtains in the room all reminded me that this was clearly my husband's hometown in the countryside. It happened that the minute hand of the pendulum clock had reached 12, and the dull bell rang, making the room seem particularly strange. At midnight, there would be no children playing and laughing outside, unless the laughter I just heard was not made by a living person at all. The sudden conjecture in my heart made my heart palpitate uncontrollably, and even my teeth trembled with trembling fingers. He wanted to wake up the sleeping husband next to him, but his mouth was wide open for a long time, but he couldn't send half a syllable. My heart was beating like a drum, but my limbs were stiff as if they were tied up. I was completely panicked, trying my best to struggle. But no matter what, it was like being nailed to the bed, and I could only hear the sound of the child's laughter getting louder and louder. I didn't dare to blink even as I stared at him. I was afraid that when I closed my eyes and opened them again, there would be more things in front of me that I shouldn't have. In the silent room, the children's laughter was louder than louder, accompanied by the baby's shrill cries. I was collapsing when I suddenly felt a few drops of sticky, foul-smelling liquid dripping on my face, moving my nose. I felt a strong bloody breath in hindsight, and my boneless little hand caressed my cheek. I lifted my eyes up, and I was confronted with a pair of empty, bleeding eye sockets. The eye sockets suddenly magnified in front of me, and blood was dripping down. The smell of blood made me tremble all over, and screams pressed into my throat. Unable to shout, I could only watch helplessly as the baby grinned, filed weirdly, and crawled down my cheeks towards my bulging belly. The child in the belly seemed to feel the existence of the ghost baby, moving uneasily, and the abdomen bulged and fell. The ghost baby sat quietly with its back to me, covered in blood, and hunched over its waist, but it made me feel hairy for no reason. Sure enough, in the next moment, the baby turned around, sat on his belly, and grinned at me. I finally saw his appearance clearly. What kind of child was he? He was clearly a deformed freak who had not yet developed, and could not distinguish between men and women. His boneless little hand stretched out and stroked my stomach again and again. Then I saw him grinning again, and sharp nails grew on his hands at some point. The pain of my belly being cut open made my scalp tingle, and I heard him speak in a strange tone in a trance. Mom, didn't you beg me to come? Why did I come and you start to be afraid again? His laughter became louder and louder, and my eardrums began to hurt uncontrollably. Finally, as if I had broken through some shackles, I screamed in shock. The husband beside me was startled awake by my screams, and subconsciously frowned and asked me what I was screaming about in the middle of the night. Hubby, save me, save our child. That ghost baby is going to open my belly. I trembled in my voice, buried tightly in his arms and trembled. I closed my eyes tightly and didn't dare to open them, but I heard him open his mouth calmly. What the hell? Yishin, are you having a nightmare? He was still a little unhappy to be woken up by me, and he was a little impatient when he spoke, but he was very serious. It didn't mean to lie to me. I opened my eyes, and carefully put my hands on my belly. I looked around fiercely. There was no blood on the bed, and no ghost baby. Everything was calm as if I really just had a nightmare. I breathed a sigh of relief and opened my mouth in Song's arms. Hubby, I just had a nightmare. It was really scary. That monster covered in blood used its sharp claws to open my belly, and it muttered, calling me Mom. It's really unlucky. The baby in my belly must be the cutest child. If the disgusting thing in my dream is really born, I might as well fall to his death. I talked endlessly, but Songja did not respond to me at all. He didn't calm me at all after having a nightmare just now, and my anger surged. I straightened up from his arms, stared at his eyes and wanted to get angry at him, but was blocked by his words. Honey, what did you just say? His eyes darkened and he stared straight at me. He didn't suddenly spit out such a sentence like a god. I was so excited by his appearance that I repeated the words subconsciously. That ghost baby opened my belly and kept calling my mother, husband, you. A strange smile suddenly appeared on Song's face, and his eyes burst out in an instant, constantly muttering, Human Skin Guanyin has appeared, Human Skin Guanyin has appeared. Looking at his unfamiliar appearance, I frowned and shrank towards the end of the bed in fear. I wanted to get out of bed and drive back to the city. As soon as my feet landed, I was grabbed by a pair of hands covered in sticky liquid. I looked down and saw that the ghost baby was still there, staring at me, with empty eyes and a sharp cry, Why are you leaving? Why don't you want me? I screamed in horror, and my legs fell limply to the ground. Watching the ghost baby crawl towards my wide legs little by little, leaving a terrible bloodstain. Hubby, save me. I kept struggling backwards, calling out to Songja, hoping that he could come and save me, but he just sat on the bed, his face full of excitement. The voice was stuck like an old machine, constantly muttering, soon, and as the intonation changed, I even heard many voices of different timbres on Songja. His head and limbs creaked, entangling himself at an angle that was beyond the reach of the living, twisting and struggling. And I even heard the sound of bones breaking, but he still opened his mouth wide, revealing his pale teeth when he laughed. Soon, Human Skin Guanyin, I gave you a boy. I was so afraid that I couldn't tell whether it was a dream or reality. I could only scream and wave my arms, trying to block the ghost baby crawling between my legs, and Songja, who didn't know whether it was a human or a ghost. Yushin, wake up. Song's voice suddenly rang in my ears, and when I opened my eyes again, I found that I was still lying on the bed, with Song's anxious face in front of me. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether it was my lover, who got along day and night, or a hateful and dreadful ghost. When he pushed Songju away, he still frowned in confusion, as if he didn't understand my behavior, so he could only raise his hands awkwardly and hang in the air. Yushin, are you having a nightmare? You cry and shout when you fall asleep. No matter how I scream, I can't wake you up. What's wrong? It turned out to be a dream within a dream, but when I was about to spit out the ghost baby, I couldn't help but think of Song, the strange appearance in the dream, so my mouth opened, but still closed tightly. I've changed to a new place, and am not used to sleeping well. Let's go back to the city now, okay, husband? As soon as I finished speaking, I saw waves of blue and white on his face. After a long silence in the room, I only heard his refusal. Wait for Yushin. Wait for us to pray for Guanyin for 2 more days. You know something, don't make it difficult for me. His obviously odd look made me suspicious, and I just put on my clothes and got out of bed. If you don't go back, then I'll drive back by myself. Since I was pregnant, Songja could not wait to hold me in the palm of his hand every day, for fear that I would not be able to keep the child, and the road would not let me walk a few more steps, let alone let me drive by myself. But as soon as I finished saying that, he seemed to ignore me and looked straight at me. As I walked out, I stood at the door and confronted him for a long time before I heard him speak. Yushin, the tire blew out. You can't go back. When he said that, I suddenly felt a chill. My back crawled with cold sweat, and the words I can't go back hit the nerves in my head and buzzed. It was fine when it came. How could it suddenly break? Unless Songja didn't want to take me back. The Human Skin Guanyin serving in the ancestral hall, in the village, and this ridiculous dream within a dream seemed to be hinting at me. But the first time I came to this unfamiliar mountain village, only Songja could be my support, and a sense of powerlessness arose spontaneously. When I looked at Songja, I only saw the corners of his mouth rise. Even if it was only for a moment, I could still see the ruthlessness on his face clearly. Yushin, stop making trouble. Come back and sleep. It will be light soon. His words were considerate, but he carried some unspeakable threats. I always felt unfamiliar when I stared at the person in front of me, but I lay on the bed obediently, closing my eyes and forcing myself to fall asleep. After an unknown period of time, I still didn't feel sleepy. When I just wanted to turn over, I felt a breath of heat coming from my face, probably Songja. He leaned very close to me, with a suppressed smile in his throat, and kept muttering. The sky in the village seemed to be brighter than in the city, but at 4 o'clock, I was woken up by the sound of crowing. Wrapped in a thick coat, and was about to get out of bed, when Songja opened his eyes in a daze, and asked me where I was going. His heart skipped a beat. Although he felt that Songja had changed since he returned to the village, he still opened his mouth invisibly. You fall asleep first. I'll go to the village for a walk to get some air. By the way, I'll go to pay my respects to Guanyin, and give our Song family a big fat son. I put on my clothes, and fled out the door. The morning in the village was covered in a layer of fog, which was vaguely inaccurate. I walked along the muddy dirt road. After going around for a long time, I didn't see the shadow of a car. I didn't know how to go around, and come to the gate of the ancestral temple in the village. The Buddha statue of Guanyin, who asked for a son, sat quietly on the table. With lowered eyes and a compassionate look, by some miracle, I actually walked in and looked at it carefully. The Guanyin body covered with a thin soft layer of skin, white in the red, but also exudes a special fragrance. I unconsciously stretched out my hand, just about to pick up to see. I saw the kind-eyed bodhisattva suddenly staring at me, glaring at me, and strange baby laughter sounded in the ancestral temple. But this time, there were a few more tragic cries of a baby girl. The voice sounded from all directions, like an airtight net, constantly drilling into my ears. I ran out of the ancestral temple door gasping for breath. I just sat on the ground, panting for breath. As soon as I turned around, I saw a big face sticking in front of me. I couldn't bear the fright anymore and retreated in embarrassment. The woman was unkempt. Her clothes were dirty and clumped, and her stained fingers pointed at me. Here comes another one. This is the 89th one. I suddenly remembered what my husband said to me when he said that only 100 baby girl skins could be sewn into a complete piece and attached to Guanyin's body. The crazy woman kept pointing at me and reciting 89, and involuntarily linked the two numbers together. I panicked for a while, and I always felt that the woman seemed to know something, so I trembled and carefully moved towards her step by step. What do you mean by the 89? Her eyes suddenly cleared up. You can see me. For some reason, she looked at me again with some joy, cautiously attached to my ear, and said something without thinking. The boy sent by human Skin Guanyin is not a child. It's a substitute. Will you still be you the next time I see you? As soon as I finished speaking, before I could think about the deep meaning of her words, I saw her laughing madly again, running and jumping, singing songs that I couldn't understand. Guanyin laughs. Guanyin laughs. The boy in the belly croaks. The boy falls to the ground and waits for 18 and one to spread his life. The white-haired old man is blue silk, and he deceived a woman to ask for a boy. The strange songs accompanied her farther, and I came back to my senses, only to see Song just staring in my direction under the big tree by the bridge.